The student in the third row was crying. She was 21 years old. She was studying psychology. She had come to the Aula Magna that morning because her professor had offered extra credit for attending the lecture. She had expected to sit in the back, scroll through her phone and leave after an hour. She did not leave. She did not scroll. She sat in the third row of one of the oldest lecture halls in Europe, a hall decorated with Mario Cironi's massive fresco of Italy among the arts and sciences, a hall that has hosted scholars and statesmen for nearly a century, and she listened to the Pope of the Catholic Church tell her something that no one in her life had ever said to her with such clarity and such conviction. "You are a desire, not an algorithm." 6 words, and she was crying, not quietly, not discreetly. The kind of crying that comes when something you did not know was broken inside you is suddenly named. On May 14th, Pope Leo XIV walked into the Sapienza University of Rome, the largest university in Europe, founded by Pope Boniface VIII in 1303, and delivered a speech that had nothing to do with theology, nothing to do with canon law, nothing to do with the institutional politics that consume most papal addresses. He spoke about a lie, a specific lie, a lie that he said is destroying an entire generation of young people, and he named it with a precision that left 1,200 students, professors, and university administrators in stunned silence. If you want to understand what that lie is, and why the Pope's decision to name it publicly in a secular university, in front of an audience that included agnostics, atheists, and people who had never set foot in a church, may be the most important thing he has done since taking office. Stay with this video. Every word matters. Subscribe now and turn on notifications, because this is not just a story about faith. This is a story about you. The visit itself was historic. No pope had entered the Sapienza University since 2008, when a planned visit by Pope Benedict XVI was cancelled after a group of professors and students protested, citing a speech Benedict had made years earlier that they interpreted as hostile to scientific inquiry. The cancellation was a humiliation for the Vatican and a wound that had never fully healed. For 18 years, the doors of Italy's most prestigious public university had remained symbolically closed to the Bishop of Rome. Leo XIV reopened them, and the way he did it tells you everything about the kind of pope he is. He did not demand an invitation. He did not negotiate through diplomatic channels. He wrote a personal letter to the rector of the Sapienza, Antonella Polimeni, a professor of dentistry who has led the university since 2020, in which he expressed his admiration for the university's tradition of intellectual inquiry, his respect for its secular character, and his desire to address the students not as a religious authority, but as a man who has spent his life teaching, and who believes that the university is one of the few places left in the modern world where truth is still pursued for its own sake. The letter was discussed at a faculty meeting. There was debate. There was opposition. A small group of professors in the physics department circulated a petition against the visit, echoing the 2008 protests. But the rector overruled the objections. The invitation was extended, and on the morning of May 14th, the Pope's motorcade, a modest convoy of 3 cars, without the ceremonial pomp that typically accompanies a papal visit, pulled through the gates of the Città Universitaria, the campus designed by Marcello Piacentini and inaugurated in 1935. He entered the Aula Magna at 10:15 in the morning. The Aula Magna of the Sapienza is not an ordinary lecture hall. It is a temple of Italian intellectual life, a soaring space with marble floors, tiered seating for over 1,500, and Cironi's enormous fresco stretching across the wall behind the stage, a work commissioned in 1935 that depicts Italy surrounded by the allegories of knowledge, science, law, and art. Popes, presidents, Nobel laureates, and heads of state have stood at its lectern. It is a room designed to make anyone who enters it feel the weight of 700 years of uninterrupted intellectual tradition. Leo XIV walked to the lectern slowly. He was dressed in white, the papal cassock, the white zucchetto, the simple pectoral cross that he has worn since his election, reportedly the same cross he wore as Bishop of Chiclayo. He wore no other insignia. He carried no notes, no binder, no folder. He had memorized the entire speech, all 47 minutes of it. 1,200 people were waiting, students who had arrived early to get seats, professors who had cancelled classes to attend, university staff, administrators, members of the faculty senate. journalists from every major Italian newspaper and 3 international wire services, a handful of Vatican officials who had come to observe, including 2 members of the Dicastery for Culture and Education. The atmosphere, according to multiple accounts, was electric, with a peculiar combination of genuine curiosity and habitual academic skepticism. These were not the faithful. These were not pilgrims who had traveled from distant countries for a glimpse of the Holy Father. They were academics, trained to question, to doubt, to demand evidence, to resist emotional manipulation. Many of them were secular, some were openly atheist, and they were watching the head of the Catholic Church walk to a lectern in their university with the quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was going to say and exactly who he was saying it to. He stood at the lectern for a moment without speaking. He looked at the audience, not at a section of it, at all of it. He made eye contact with students in the front rows. He looked up at the balcony where graduate students were standing because there were no more seats. He took a breath. He began without preamble. No greeting, no acknowledgement of dignitaries, no pleasantries. I want to talk to you about a lie, not a political lie, not a religious lie, a lie about what you are. The room went quiet, not the polite quiet of an audience settling in, the absolute quiet of people who have just been told something that matters. There is a system, and I am speaking carefully, because I do not want to caricature something that is complex. There is a system that tells you every day, through every screen you touch and every metric you are measured by, that you are a number, that your worth is determined by your productivity, that your value is a function of your performance, that you exist to compete, to optimize, to perform, and that if you fail to perform, you are dispensable. He paused. He looked at the students in the front rows. This is the great lie, and it is destroying you. A professor of sociology who was sitting in the faculty section said the room changed in that moment. There was a collective intake of breath. You could feel it. He had named something that every student in that room knew was true, but that no one had said out loud in that way. Not a therapist, not a philosopher, not a professor. The Pope. Leo XIV continued. He spoke for 47 minutes. He did not raise his voice. He did not gesture dramatically. He did not pace the stage or lean into the microphone for effect. He stood at the lectern with the stillness of a man who had spent decades in classrooms, first as a seminarian at St. Augustine's Priory in Chicago, then as a theology professor at Augustinian institutions in Lima, then as a bishop who personally taught catechism classes in rural Peruvian parishes, and who knew that the most powerful thing a teacher can do is speak quietly enough that the audience has to lean in. And they leaned in. From the first sentence, the 1,200 people in the Aula Magna leaned in. He began with the diagnosis. He described what he called the spiritual malaise of the current generation. Not a theological diagnosis, he was careful to say, but a human one, an observable, measurable, documented crisis that does not require faith to recognize and does not require religion to grieve. He cited statistics, not vaguely, precisely. He had done his research, or his team had done it for him, and he delivered the numbers with the dispassion of a clinician presenting a case study. Depression among university-aged adults in Europe has increased by 40% in the past decade. Anxiety disorders have doubled. The rate of students seeking psychological counseling services on European campuses has tripled since 2015. In Italy alone, 1 in 3 university students report symptoms of clinical anxiety, symptoms severe enough to interfere with their ability to study, to sleep, to maintain relationships, to function. In the United States, the country where Leo XIV was born and educated, the statistics are worse. The Surgeon General has declared youth mental health a national crisis. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among Americans aged 15 to 24. Emergency room visits for self-harm among teenage girls have increased by 60% since 2010. The generation that was supposed to be the most connected in human history is, by every measurable standard, the loneliest. These are not statistics about weak people, the Pope said. His voice was steady. His eyes moved across the audience. These are statistics about a system that is designed, whether intentionally or not, and I leave that judgment to others, to produce anxiety. A system that measures everything and values nothing. A system that tells you that you are what you achieve, and then makes achievement impossible for most. and unsatisfying for the rest. He let the silence hold for 3 seconds. It felt longer. He named the mechanisms, one by one. With the methodical precision of a professor delivering a lecture he had spent months preparing, social media platforms that are engineered, not accidentally, not as a side effect, but by design, to profit from comparison and insecurity. He described how algorithms amplify content that triggers anxiety, envy, and self-doubt, because those emotions drive engagement, and engagement drives revenue. "You are not the customer," he said. "You are the product. Your attention is sold. Your insecurity is monetized. And the system that profits from your pain has no incentive to heal it." Academic systems that reduce the infinite complexity of human potential to grade point averages, standardized test scores, and publication metrics. "You are trained to measure yourselves against each other," he said, "not to grow together, but to rank, not to learn, but to outperform. And the result is not excellence. The result is exhaustion. Labor markets that treat young people as disposable inputs in an optimization equation, temporary contracts, unpaid internships, gig work that offers flexibility in exchange for security. A generation that cannot plan its future," he said, "is a generation that has been told, in every practical way, that its future does not matter. A culture of meritocracy that promises success is available to everyone through talent and effort, and then systematically blames individuals for failures that are structural, economic, and political. The cruelest feature of this lie," the Pope said, "is that it makes you responsible for your own suffering. It tells you, if you are anxious, it is because you are not trying hard enough. If you are depressed, it is because you are not strong enough. If you are falling behind, it is because you are not good enough. This is not truth. This is abuse. The blackmail of expectations," he called it, "the pressure to perform." 2 phrases that students in the audience later said described their daily experience with devastating accuracy. A 24-year-old doctoral student in engineering told an Italian newspaper, "I have never heard an authority figure, any authority figure, religious or otherwise, describe my life so precisely. He was not guessing. He understood." Then he turned to the deeper argument, the argument that made this speech more than a critique of modern culture and turned it into something that theologians, philosophers, and social theorists are still discussing weeks later. "The lie is not just that you must perform," he said. "The lie is about what you are. The lie says, you are matter, you are biology, you are neurons firing in patterns that can be predicted and manipulated. You are an algorithm, a set of inputs and outputs that can be optimized if the right data is applied." He shook his head slowly. "No, you are not an algorithm. You are a desire. You are an aching, reaching, endless desire for meaning, for love, for truth, for something that no metric can measure and no platform can deliver. You are not the sum of what you have. You are not matter randomly assembled in a mute cosmos. You are a question that the universe cannot answer by itself. And the fact that you ask that question, the fact that you are here in this hall, alive and aware and searching, is not an accident. It is a gift." The line, "We are a desire, not an algorithm," landed in the hall like a hammer on glass. Something shifted. You could see it in the body language of the audience. Students who had been leaning back in their chairs leaned forward. Professors who had been taking notes stopped writing and simply listened. The skepticism that had been visible on many faces when the Pope entered the hall was gone. In its place was something rarer. Attention. Real, undivided, unperformed attention. The attention that a human being gives when they hear something that is true. Several students began recording on their phones. Not to post, not to share, to keep. Within hours, the phrase was circulating on social media across Italy, first on Instagram, then on TikTok, where a student's 20-second clip of the Pope saying the line accumulated over 3 million views in 48 hours. Within 2 days, it had been translated into dozens of languages and shared across every continent. It appeared on T-shirts, hand-printed by a design student in Florence and sold online within 72 hours. It appeared on protest signs at a student demonstration against tuition increases in Milan. It appeared, handwritten in black marker, on the wall of a dormitory bathroom at the University of Bologna, where it remains, because no one has had the heart to remove it. It became, overnight, the most quoted line by any pope since Francis's "Who am I to judge?" But where Francis's line was a question, open-ended, interpretive, ambiguous, Leo's was a declaration, a statement of fact, a claim about the nature of reality that brooked no compromise and invited no debate. You are a desire. You are not an algorithm. Full stop. But Leo XIV was not finished. He pivoted, in a move that surprised even Vatican officials who had been briefed on the speech's outline but not on its full contents, from the personal to the political, from the crisis of the individual to the crisis of civilization. He spoke about artificial intelligence, and here the audience shifted again, because this was not the vague, technophobic warning that academics expected from a 71-year-old religious leader. Leo XIV spoke about AI not in the abstract philosophical terms that church documents typically use, but in specific, grounded terms that revealed either a surprising personal depth of understanding or, as several Vatican officials later confirmed, months of intensive briefings from experts in the field, including researchers from European universities and at least one former Silicon Valley executive who had been invited to a private audience at the Apostolic Palace in April. He distinguished between AI as a tool, which he acknowledged could serve human flourishing in medicine, education, scientific research, and accessibility, and AI as a replacement for human judgment in domains where moral reasoning is essential. He spoke specifically about autonomous weapons systems, about algorithms that determine creditworthiness, hiring decisions, and prison sentences, about facial recognition technology deployed against minority communities, about the concentration of AI development in a handful of corporations whose financial incentives are not aligned with the common good. He warned that AI development, particularly in military applications, must not relieve human decisions of responsibility or worsen the tragedy of conflicts. He described the automation of warfare as a betrayal of conscience itself, a delegation of the decision to kill to a machine that cannot know what killing means. He said, "A drone does not grieve. A targeting algorithm does not hesitate. A machine that can destroy a human life cannot understand what it has destroyed. And any civilization that accepts this, that delegates its most consequential moral decisions to systems incapable of morality, has already lost something it cannot recover." The connection between his critique of algorithms in personal life and his critique of algorithms in warfare was deliberate. It was the thread that held the entire speech together. The same logic that reduces a student to a grade point average reduces a human being to a target on a screen. The same system that tells you your worth is your productivity tells a government that a life is worth less than the cost of a missile. The great lie is not just personal, it is civilizational. He spoke about Europe's military buildup. He did not name specific countries, but his meaning was unmistakable to anyone following European politics. He described the record levels of military spending across the continent, over $3 trillion globally in 2025, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, and said that the rearmament of Europe, whatever its geopolitical justification, impoverishes investments in education and healthcare. He noted that several European nations had increased their military budgets by 20 to 40% in 2 years, while cutting funding for universities, mental health services, and youth employment programs. "Do not mislabel rearmament as defense," he said. "A continent that spends more on weapons than on its young people has made a choice about its future, and it is the wrong choice." He looked directly at the students as he said this, not at the professors, not at the journalists, at the students, because they were the ones who would inherit the consequences of that choice. He spoke about peace, about the contamination of reason that occurs when the logic of war, the logic of enemies, of us versus them, of the other as threat, seeps from the geopolitical level into everyday social relationships. He said, "The simplification that creates enemies must be corrected, especially in the university, through care for complexity and the wise exercise of memory." He was speaking about international conflict, but everyone in the room understood that he was also speaking about the culture wars, the social media wars, the political polarization that has turned every disagreement into a battle and every opponent into an enemy. He spoke about the university itself, about the idea of the university as one of the last institutions in modern civilization, where truth is pursued not for profit, not for power, not for competitive advantage, but for its own sake. He praised the Sapienza's 7th-century tradition of intellectual courage. He quoted its founding spirit, wisdom building her own house, and said that the house of wisdom must remain open to every question, including the questions that science alone cannot answer, questions about meaning, questions about love, questions about death, questions about why we are here and what we owe each other. You are here because you believe in knowledge, he said. So do I. But knowledge without wisdom is a weapon, and wisdom without compassion is a cage. Be both. Be wise and compassionate. Be rigorous and kind. Be brilliant and humble. The world does not need more experts. It needs more human beings. And then he closed with a single command. Not a plea, not a suggestion, not a gentle pastoral encouragement. A command, delivered with the quiet authority of a man who has spent his entire adult life telling young people what they are capable of. Be a radical yes to life. The hall erupted, not in the polite applause of an academic audience tolerating a dignitary, not in the ritual ovation that protocol demands when a head of state finishes speaking, in genuine, sustained, thunderous standing applause, students on their feet, professors on their feet, the rector on her feet, the small group of physics professors who had signed the petition against the visit, they were on their feet too. The applause lasted nearly 2 minutes. It might have lasted longer, but the Pope raised his hand gently and the room quieted, as if 1,200 people were responding to a single gesture from a single man. He did not bow. He did not wave. He simply looked at them, at the students, at the professors, at the staff, at the journalists in the back rows, with an expression that those present described as gratitude, not the gratitude of a performer receiving applause, the gratitude of a teacher who knows that the lesson has been received. Then he walked off the stage. No encore, no Q&A session, no meet and greet. He walked to the exit, shook the rector's hand, and was gone. The entire departure took less than 90 seconds. The hall remained full for another 20 minutes. Students standing in groups, talking, processing, several of them still visibly moved. Afterward, in the courtyard outside the Aula Magna, journalists gathered to interview students. The student in the 3rd row, the one studying psychology, the one who had come for extra credit, was asked what the speech meant to her. She said, "I have been in therapy for 2 years because I feel like I am not enough, like I am always falling behind, like I am a machine that is not performing well enough. And today the Pope walked into my university and told me that I am not a machine, that I am a desire, that I matter not because of what I produce, but because of what I am." She paused. No one ever said that to me before. Not like that. In the days since the speech, the reaction has been extraordinary in both its breadth and its intensity, a rare moment in which a papal address crossed the boundary between religious news and mainstream cultural conversation. Progressive commentators praised Leo XIV for engaging with secular culture on its own terms, for addressing mental health without stigma or condescension, and for offering a vision of human dignity that transcends religious affiliation. An editorial in La Repubblica, a newspaper not known for its sympathy toward the Vatican, described the speech as the most relevant thing a pope has said to non-believers in a generation. A professor of philosophy at the University of Milan wrote that Leo XIV had accomplished something that few religious leaders ever manage. He spoke as a theologian to an audience of secularists, and they heard not theology, but truth. Conservative Catholics praised the speech for its clear, unapologetic articulation of the Church's teaching on the human person, the imago Dei, the image of God, which holds that every human being possesses inherent and inalienable dignity, not because of what they do, what they produce, or what they achieve, but because of what they are, creatures made in the image and likeness of God. A traditionalist Catholic commentator wrote, "This is the Pope at his best, speaking the truth of the faith without compromise, without apology, and without the mushy sentimentality that has plagued Catholic public discourse for decades." Critics, including several prominent AI researchers and technology executives, pushed back against what they described as the Pope's romantic anti-modernism. A column in Wired Italia argued that the Pope's critique of algorithms was a fundamental misunderstanding of how technology works, and that his characterization of AI as inherently dehumanizing was simplistic and unhelpful. A professor of computer science at the Sapienza itself, who had attended the speech and applauded at the end, nonetheless wrote a response arguing that the Pope's desire is itself an algorithm, whether he likes it or not. The brain is a computational system. Desire is a pattern of neural activation. The distinction the Pope draws between the human and the algorithmic is philosophically unsustainable. The debate continues. It will continue for months, perhaps for years. It has already generated more academic papers, opinion pieces, and social media discourse than any other papal address in recent memory. But inside the Vatican, the speech is viewed as something far more significant than a viral moment or a successful public relations exercise. It is viewed as a statement of purpose, a declaration of what this pontificate is about. Not institutional politics, not canonical disputes, not the management of a bureaucratic empire, but the defense of the human person against every force that seeks to reduce, commodify, or erase the sacred dignity that every human being carries. A senior advisor to the Pope said, he did not go to the Sapienza to convert anyone. He went to tell the truth, to say something that needed to be said, in a place where it needed to be heard, to an audience that needed to hear it. That is what he believes a Pope is for. Not to manage an institution, not to preside over ceremonies, to tell the truth, especially the truths that no one else is willing to say. Another Vatican official, who has known Leo XIV since his years in Peru, offered a more personal perspective. People do not understand this Pope because they think he is a politician. He is not a politician. He is a teacher. Everything he does, every speech, every decision, every gesture, is an act of teaching. And the Sapienza speech was the purest expression of that. He walked into a room full of young people who were suffering, and he taught them the truth about themselves. That is all he did, and it was enough. Meanwhile, in lecture halls and seminar rooms across Italy, professors were already incorporating the speech into their teaching. A philosophy professor at the University of Turin assigned the full text as required reading for a course on ethics and technology. A sociology professor at the University of Padua organized an impromptu seminar to discuss the Pope's critique of meritocracy. A psychology professor at the Sapienza itself, a colleague of the woman who had invited her students for extra credit, sent an email to her department that read, "The Pope just gave the most effective description of the social determinants of anxiety I have ever heard. We need to talk about why it took a religious leader to say what we should have been saying for years." Leo XIV returned to the Vatican that afternoon. He ate lunch alone in the small dining room adjacent to his private apartments. He spent the afternoon in his study, reading reports from the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. He made no public statement about the speech. He did not post on social media. He did not ask his communications team how the speech was received. He did not check the news. But that evening, as his secretary was leaving for the night, the Pope called him back. He said, "The girl in the third row, the one who was crying. Find out who she is, send her a rosary, and tell her that the Pope remembers her." The secretary asked, "What should I write on the card?" The Pope thought for a moment. Then he said, "Write, 'You are not an algorithm. You are loved.' Sign it, Leo." That rosary was delivered the following morning by Vatican courier to the dormitory of a 21-year-old psychology student at the Sapienza University of Rome. She has not spoken about it publicly. She may never speak about it publicly. But a friend of hers told an Italian journalist that when she opened the package, she held the rosary in her hands for a long time without speaking. Then she said, "Maybe the church is not what I thought it was. She is not Catholic. She has never been baptized. She does not attend Mass. She had never spoken to a priest in her life before that day. But she kept the rosary. She keeps it on her nightstand. And her friend says that she has started asking questions, not about religion, not about dogma, but about what it means to live in a world where a man she had never met could know her pain so precisely and respond to it with such gentleness." That is the legacy of May 14th, not a policy change, not a doctrinal declaration, not a headline, a rosary on a nightstand, a student who stopped believing she was a machine, a Pope who walked into a room of strangers, told them the truth about themselves, and walked out, leaving behind something that no algorithm, no metric, and no system of performance evaluation can measure. Hope. If you want to follow every step of this extraordinary pontificate, every speech, every decision, every moment that reveals who Pope Leo XIV really is, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications right now. This story is just beginning, and the best is yet to come.